More on British Prime Minister Theresa May's visit to Germany and France, and particularly the UK's future with the EU. We are joined in London by Iain Begg, who is the Professorial Research Fellow at the European Institute of the London School of Economics and Political Science. In Berlin, we are having Mr. Timo Lochocki, who is a Transatlantic Fellow of the European Program, the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Mr. Begg, great to have you now. We talk about Brexit right on the eve of it, and it's great to see you again. What do you make of Prime Minister May's ability to make the European leaders not to rush to the Brexit process now?
Well, in one way, they have no choice, because it's entirely up to Britain when to invoke this famous Article 50. If Britain chooses not to do it, everybody else can shout from the sidelines, but they cannot make the process go faster. And I think the reason that Theresa May has opted to delay invoking the article is that, quite simply, when Brexit happened, there was no plan B in government for what it should cover. And her immediate response has been to appoint ministers whose job it is to try to set out an agenda for Britain, to work out how it will separate itself from the EU, and then in parallel to try to work on how deals with other parts of the world will be constructed. A deal with China, a deal with Australia, a deal with the United States. These are all the twin tracks of the agenda that she has to negotiate. The others can say, yes, we want it faster, but there's not really much they can do to force her.
But the question is, Mr. Lochocki, the others don't even say that we want it faster. Apparently, the others just say, okay, we'll go with your flow. Maybe next year, or maybe we don't know what time.
Well, of course, this depends on the national perspective on the matter. The German and the French perspectives on that regard differ remarkably. The Germans have no interest whatsoever to have the UK leave the European Union as soon as possible. Germany wants stable relations to one of the most important trading partners for German industry. And in German politics, the Brexit debate is extremely relaxed, very collected, very rational, meaning German politicians have nothing to gain to play with the Brexit debate. However, this is a very different issue in France, where in the next presidential campaign, Hollande is trying to play hard or play hardball on the European Union affairs. And here, he is very interested in showing a hard line, a tough line against Great Britain, and he wants to make use of being a tough pro-European president in his bid for re-election in May 2016. This is very different in Germany. That's why the Germans are far more relaxed than the French in this respect.
Come on, Mr. Lochocki, we have to make clear here. The Chancellor Merkel was pretty much outspoken when the referendum was being passed inside the UK about Brexit. She said as soon as possible. And we don't want to forget either that Germany is playing such a big role these days inside the EU. Some would even say this has been a tug of war between two women now, Mrs. May and Mrs. Merkel. So you can't just brush it off and say, well, maybe Germany, we don't as concerned as the French do about this. This is just not true, Mr. Lochocki.
Well, I'm not saying Angela Merkel is not concerned. German business, German industry, German economics is very concerned. The question is, though, whether this concerns lead German politicians to push Great Britain out of the European Union as soon as possible. Especially because German politicians are so concerned, they want to have this organized, swift, and orchestrated. That's why they have no interest whatsoever to rush this very issue. Angela Merkel has been very outspoken, you're totally right. The UK must leave the European Union, that's for sure, that's not up for debate. But Germany is not in a rush regarding the timing. So there is not a tug of war between Ms. May and Ms. Merkel, not at all. I do think Angela Merkel and Theresa May are both interested in finding a solution which is in the very interest of the European Union and the UK, and they hereby have a special interest in the economic interests. And here they say, time is necessary to sort out this unprecedented legal issue.
Well, time has always been on the Europe side, hasn't it? I mean, after so many years, many issues has not been resolved. There was an urgency of 2 years, and now it seems that things have relaxed as well. Don't take me wrong, Mr. Begg. I'm not pushing anything. I'm just asking you whether the timetable is still the timetable, Mr. Begg.
Well, there are two aspects to the timetable. The first is when the button is pressed to start the race. That's the invoking of Article 50. And then there's a 2-year prescribed period, which, by the way, can be extended. That wasn't made clear in your package, by agreement of all parties. What's going to happen next is that Britain will be very carefully trying to formulate what it wants. Both sides, I think we should be very clear on this as well, both sides have an interest in doing it as quickly as possible, because the spirit of uncertainty that hangs over both the British economy and the European economy is something that nobody wants and is in nobody's interest. It risks being a kind of lose-lose game if you prolong it too much. However, once you invoke Article 50, it's a prescribed process, and one which doesn't allow much deviation apart from the possibility of extending it. And that's why you want to get it right when you start on it, so that you're not then sidetracked into things which have to be negotiated differently from the main divorce negotiations.
Right.
It's a messy process.
It is a messy process.
I think both sides understand this.
Yes, it is a messy process. That's why it's becoming extremely interesting and intellectual process in a way. But let me ask you, Mr. Begg, having said what you just said, the right timing, what exactly is the right timing you are referring to? Is it the right timing about doing the negotiations, or is it the right timing for the politicians? Because we understand there's likely to be 2 elections next year for both France and Germany, and not to mention Mrs. May is not likely to have a whole term. She's rather having limited time for this term. So what kind of right timing are we talking about here? Will this generation of leaders just postpone whatever it is necessary to the next and kick the ball down the road rather?
Well, I think what you've already heard is correct, that Francois Hollande is facing elections next spring. He faces an insurgency from his right wing, the National Front Party, led by Marine Le Pen. And he wants to show that he's tough enough in negotiations to be trusted by the French people. I don't think it's going to work for him, because his rating is already so low that he is unlikely to be able to recover enough to be the prime candidate. Nevertheless, France does not want to encourage this populist party, the National Front. And that is one of the big considerations for France. For Britain, it's different. I don't think Theresa May is either accelerating or decelerating the timetable for her own direct political gain, because she's in post, if she wants it, till 2020, which will be well beyond the 2 years. What she's concerned about is being able to construct a British position that makes sense.
Right. What about construct the German position? What about construct the EU's position? Mr. Lochocki, do you think what is the right timing, or the right timing can be forever postponed?
Well, I entirely agree with Mr. Berg on his deliberations. I do think that the French push for this because of the elections lurking, where the European political issue is of prime concern to French voters. However, for the German election in September 2017, European issues play a very, very minor role, and the German far right is extremely, well, it's far, far, far less important than in France. It might even cease to exist up until next autumn. That means that domestic power play doesn't play a great role for the German Chancellor. So I think she will just wait out until Theresa May, as Mr. Burke said, has figured out what Great Britain really wants. And after she knows what Great Britain really wants, what they put on the table, she will try to forge a reaction, a German reaction, which is trying to combine the interest of all European countries. However, what's pretty clear is the German positions is largely interested in keeping the UK as closely as possible to the common European market, to make sure exports and imports between London and Berlin continue to flow as swiftly as possible.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Mr. Begg, even though the counterparts could have different opinions, what about internally for Mrs. May? She was elected, or not elected, rather selected after the referendum of Brexit.
Chosen.
And she is supposed to be there to implement so-called the will of the people. So can she endure these kinds of delay, if we could use the word, and will the people, quote unquote, allow her to do so?
Well, to be blunt about it, the people don't have much say at this point, because it's up to the government and the parliament to take the next steps. However, what Mrs. May has to reconcile is one message from the electorate in the Leave vote was, we don't want more migrants. And if she wants to maintain access to the full single market in Europe, that comes with it the obligation to accept migrants from other EU countries. So there's an incompatibility at the heart of this, which she has to find a way around. And that, I think, is what's going to make it very difficult for her to construct a package of trade access, including access, let's face it, for the service industries on which Britain depends very heavily, as well as finding a way to limit migration just enough to satisfy this demand from the British people.
Right.
Some would say you cannot have both at once, and that's her challenge.
Well, you might say delaying some time might help to figure out a concrete plan and get everybody prepared. But a delay also means, Mr. Lochocki, uncertainties. And the economy hates uncertainties. The markets hate uncertainties. So what would that mean? The pros and cons of these so-called delay, or let's just wait for the right timing.
Well, to give a very, very cynical reply here, the uncertainty in this respect lies with the British economy, not with the European, and most certainly not with the German economy so much. As long as these negotiations linger or haven't even triggered, the money, the foreign direct investment will be stopped in the direction of Great Britain, in the direction of the UK. As long as the negotiations take, the more investors which are interested in Europe will refocus their energies or their interest to other Eurozone markets, first and foremost Germany. So in this respect, Germany is not in a hurry at all. That's why basically, as you know, the financial markets, the financial place of Frankfurt is benefiting from, as longer as these negotiations take, the money will flow to Germany as long as investors do not know how Great Britain wants to strike a bargain between the migration challenge, as Mr. Berg pointed out, and the access to the free market. And to make this very, very clear, as much as Germany, the German Chancellor, is interested in keeping the UK as close to the European market as possible, there will be no chance to get access to the European market without ensuring the free movement of people within the European Union.
All right.
And very clear, this is not to be negotiated.
Okay, Mr. Begg, even though you're not coming from Mrs. May's cabinet, but you probably have to solve the problem, as Mr. Lochocki just pointed out. There's no way that you could have the advantages without really paying, quote-unquote, the price, or also shouldering the responsibilities. Mr. Begg.
Well, I think one of the lessons politicians learn very early is never say never, because there's always going to be some compromise that can be constructed. So they will be searching for a formula, a softening of something here or there, maybe what's been called an emergency brake on migration as one kind of way of dealing with this. But I think that there are more fundamental questions, which is it's not just a problem for the British economy. We've already seen the great difficulties of Italian banks, which have been aggravated by the uncertainty around what's happening with Brexit. Even that German institution, the Deutsche Bank, has some difficulties at present. So financial instability in Europe would be caused by extending the Brexit uncertainty. So let's not pretend that Germany is immune from this.
All right, and before we go, we do have a very important question that I need to throw out to these two gentlemen. That is, what about these two ladies? I mean, for the very first time in Europe history, at least over the past few decades, that one very important question about the continent's fate is likely to be in the hands of two ladies, of course with the help of the cabinets on their own. But what do you make of this chemistry between these two ladies? Mr. Begg, we've been playing once and again on our screen the shaking hand scene between these two ladies. What do you make of it? Will that be, in a way, sustainable for the future?
Well, I think it will. It's intriguing to look at the parallels between their two backgrounds. They're both the daughters of Protestant ministers. They both have low-profile husbands, they both have no children, and they both enjoy having walking holidays in the Alps during the summer. So I think there's a lot of common ground between them that has been underestimated.
Even the wardrobe could be very different. The working styles seem to be quite similar. Get down to work, roll up the sleeves. Mr. Lochocki,
oh yes,
your view?
Very, very serious people.
I entirely agree. I mean, I wouldn't pay too much attention to the common history they might share. However, their current working habits, they're very pragmatic, they're very down to earth, they're very well connected. They both had more or less the most important parties within their country, namely the Tories or the Conservatives from Germany, meaning they have the most powerful networks, and they tend to, in stark contrast to other European leaders, base their actions in very rational, long-term considerations, which I do think at this very critical, pivotal juncture for Europe is very, very good news for the continent.
Right, and we are running out of time, even though we could have further discussion about this very important topic for a long time. But so far, thank you so much, Iain Begg and Timo Lochocki, two gentlemen, for being with us on a Friday evening. Thank you so much.